This is Alexa with the Clinicians Atelier, and we're super excited to have Lindsay McGovern with us here today to share about how she has grown her practice and give a little bit of insights. I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure. My name is Lindsay McGovern, and I am a solo private practice owner and clinician. I'm based in New Jersey, but I provide telehealth. I'm solely telehealth, actually, in the states of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, and Florida. I specialize in OCD and anxiety disorders. My niche is working with, obviously, OCD and anxiety, but particularly millennial women who tend to be professionals, overachievers, really struggling with those intrusive thoughts and feelings. And I love it. I've been technically in private practice since 2018, but I did not go full-time until the fall of 2021. So it's been 3 years that I've been full-time in private practice.
You're like, you described me. That's so funny. I'm not OCD though. I don't think I am. But definitely the anxiety part of an overachiever. All right, awesome. So you mentioned when we previously had spoken that growing your practice has involved niching down, which you just mentioned, and being clear about who your ideal client is. Can you walk us through this process? How were you able to kind of niche down and decide this is who you wanted to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, naturally, I was drawn to anxious women. And as we've all probably heard a million times before, we tend to kind of navigate towards people who are like ourselves. And so are a younger version of ourselves, obviously. So, I grew up with anxiety. I've always kind of considered myself an anxious person. I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm an INFJ. And so I was kind of naturally drawn to working with women with anxiety. But over the course of these last 6-7 years, I became more and more interested in OCD. And my mom, prior to her passing in 2020, had OCD. And so it's something I'm kind of passionate about with regard to kind of seeing some of her journey with suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder, and honestly not getting also OCD specialized treatment that was really effective before she passed. And so one of the contract positions that I took when I was initially starting part-time private practice was actually with a telehealth company that was solely OCD clientele. And that also afforded me a lot of training, a lot of supervision, a lot of really niching down with the OCD population. And I just absolutely loved it. And from there, I was like, I know I really want to have this be a part of my niche.
What impact has this clarity had on your practice's growth?
It has had an invaluable amount of impact. It's hard to know with 100% certainty what aspect is working, like why this is so successful and why you're thriving. But I really, truly believe one of those aspects is the niche itself. I think it's a combination of that it's not incredibly easy to find an OCD specialist, combined with my passion for it. Because I'm so niched down, if I'm on an intake call with someone who's coming to me inquiring about OCD therapy, I think it really comes across how passionate I am about it and what a specialist I am in it, that I'm an expert and I feel like an expert, and the person and the potential client is really hearing that I'm an expert. And so I really think that truly makes such a big difference. I think lots of times clinicians have this fear of, niching down further and further. And my experience has only been the opposite, that the further you go down and the more specialized you become and more of an expert you become, it's just such a win-win for both the clinician and the client.
Yeah, I think that's really true for just business in general. And that was something I experienced myself. And, people can always go back and hear my story. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I used to brand startups in general, and I thought that was an edge. And then back in 2016, as I mentioned to you previously, I started working with direct cash pay type models. And then I realized that actually made me grow more because I began to become an expert. Like you're saying, I began to understand the messaging. I began to understand how do you speak to this target audience. And also I was the target audience. So I understood, okay, this makes sense. And so I totally agree with what you're saying. I think there is a fear sometimes if I niche, I'm not going to get clients or I'm not going to grow. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's the opposite. The more you niche, the more people come to you because they see you as the expert in your field. And so they want to come to you. And then you have like success stories of people you have been able to help versus if you've helped one person here, one person there with all these different types of focuses, it may be harder to really get people to come to you because you're trying to do too much. And so I definitely think that's really important. And that actually leads me to another question, just because I'm curious, we might kind of jump forward a little bit here. On your website, is there any kind of messaging where you kind of position yourself as that expert?
Yeah, absolutely. So I even started with the domain. Like my website is ocd-teletherapy.com. So it is clear off the bat, like how much I just delved right into. I am making this clear that this is an OCD therapy website, right? And even with that, I was a little hesitant at first. I was like, oh, this is getting too specific of it just having OCD right there, as opposed to like my name or a practice or whatever. But I was like, no, I'm all in, right? Like I love working with people with OCD. I want people to understand I'm the person to go to if you're suffering with obsessive compulsive disorder. So I jumped right in, my initial phrasing is, are you ready to find peace from your intrusive thoughts? And then I immediately go into that I work with millennial women who are ready to, reclaim their lives and kick OCD and anxiety to the curb. And then my copy speaks directly to the experience of having those intrusive thoughts and feelings and waking up and feeling overwhelmed with the distress and the guilt and the doubt. And so, yeah, I really just jumped right in on my website and it's like, nope, I'm making it really clear who I work with.
That's so good. I always tell people your messaging, especially on the first page, I always say the homepage is like your summary page, is like where you want to feed people throughout your website. And I think it's so important that you said right off the bat, you're not talking about so much yourself, but like, how can I solve your problems? How can I help you? And you make it about them. And ultimately, that's what pulls them in. Out of curiosity, because I know you said OCD and anxiety, is there an overlap typically with the both, with the OCD and the anxiety? And that's why you went straight to the OCD and then you also treat the anxiety?
So the reason I added in anxiety disorders is because it's not, I mean, occasionally I get a client who has an anxiety disorder who doesn't have obsessive compulsive disorder. So there is that. I would say 95% of my clients have OCD, but I did add in anxiety disorders because it's not incredibly uncommon for people with OCD to also have another anxiety disorder, whether it's social anxiety, whether it's a phobia, whether it's health anxiety. And so I also just wanted to make it clear on my website, I have, a page for OCD and I have a page for anxiety where I'm a little bit more, I go into the details of like health anxiety and phobias, etc., just so people know that that's an area we can also focus on in treatment as well. Also, occasionally people come to me who think they may have OCD, but they don't have they haven't had a diagnosis. They don't feel firm in that. And so, and they've always kind of labeled themselves as more just anxious. And so sometimes drawing in that kind of OCD and anxiety for people who are just kind of relating to themselves more as anxious versus having OCD, I thought could also be helpful.
Oh, that's good. That's actually pretty insightful. I was just kind of curious for my own knowledge. Okay, I know we went over a couple of different ways you have grown your practice. I'm going to mention the three main ways and then we'll kind of break them down one by one. So I know you said about 1/3 was probably Psychology Today, 1/3 was SEO, and the other 1/3 was referrals.
Yes. So, I think I kind of admitted to you that I could do a better job in terms of like some accountability for myself with regard to where referrals are coming from. And so I do get a lot of referrals from my website, but I haven't really just out of not it not be necessary because, I haven't needed new clients. I haven't really looked into, are they coming from Google Business and then going to my website? Are they coming from Psychology Today, but going to my website? Is it SEO going to my website, my Instagram going to my website? So occasionally I get calls from Psychology Today directly, but a lot of referrals are coming from my website, and I'm just not tracking what fed them to my website.
So when we're saying referrals, we're not talking about referrals from other therapists. We're talking about site referrals.
Correct.
Okay, no, I think that's really important to state. No, I'm glad we clarified that, because originally I was thinking it was like other therapists. Most of your practices has been built through your online sources.
Yes. And I think another important component that isn't necessarily marketing based, because I'm not doing anything to encourage it, is word of mouth. I get a lot of word of mouth referrals. And I think, once again, this goes hand in hand with niching down, and that it's not uncommon at all, right? If you have a niche for a friend of a friend to say, oh my gosh, you also have OCD, I have a therapist for you. And so I do actually end up with a lot of word of mouth referrals. And so I guess I'm not really thinking of that more from a marketing piece, right? In that I'm not having to do anything to get those word of mouth referrals other than be just a good clinician.
That's obviously the idea, is that you provide a great service, that people do continue to share your name with others that may need your services. I think word of mouth is the best testimony, because there's a trust already established. You're not trying to sell yourself, because people already are speaking for you that have used you or have heard of someone that has worked with you. And so that's always helpful. So let's talk a little bit about Psychology Today, because that is something I often see in the Facebook groups. People ask about or say that they haven't had much success in. I know you're also licensed in multiple states, so I don't know if that has any, maybe we can talk about, do you see higher referrals from certain states versus others on Psychology Today? Let's talk about that. And then also let's just talk about your experience with Psychology Today as a whole.
Yeah, overall, my experience with Psychology Today, I mean, obviously it has ebbed and flowed. It's been years, right? So there's ebbs and flows. But overall, my experience has been pretty positive. Like, I definitely think it's worth the $30 a month that they charge. I definitely hear from other clinicians that, oh gosh, I'm not receiving any referrals. It's been 2 months that I haven't received any. I mean, part of it is expectation in terms of, if you're insurance and you are seeing 30 clients a week, you're wanting more referrals, versus if you're a private pay premium fee therapist, you're most likely wanting to see somewhere between 12 and 20 clients. And so you're not wanting new referrals every week. You'd have too full of a practice. But generally speaking, once again, it ebbs and flows. So I can go, I could get 3 Psychology Today referrals in, or inquiries in a month, and then it can be quiet for a month. So it really has ebbed and flowed. But once again, I, especially with that filter with OCD and the filter with modalities, most people, once they have a diagnosis, so they recognize they have OCD and they've done a little homework of that they need a clinician that is trained in exposure and response prevention. If they're putting those filters on, Psychology Today is going to help, right? Because there are going to only be so many clinicians that, it will filter to. And then, of course, we'll lead them to my website.
I think that is a good point. One, going back to knowing your niche, because then you can use the key terms of what you specialize in. And 2, let's talk a little bit more about your profile. So it sounds like you've spent the time to really, what are some things that you would say other clinicians could do themselves to make their profile stand out a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine people have heard this before, but it really is true that throwing away the clinical jargon, the resume list is really, really key here, right? I think, and unless you put some thought into it, you may think, highlighting your expertise and it sounding more clinical could be a way to draw in clients, when really my experience, and I think a lot of other people's experience, is the exact opposite, that really speaking to the pain points and the struggles of your ideal client right off the bat, being relatable, like speaking their language, them reading it and being like, oh my gosh, she is in my brain, she gets it, is so much more valuable on your profile than just listing off, all of these different, health conditions that you treat and all the different places you worked and all the different modalities. You really want to, once again, this is why niching down is so incredibly important, but you also want your copy to really reflect kind of the inner workings of the brain of your ideal client and speak to that, as opposed to speaking as though you're giving a resume to an employer.
But I do agree with that point, is like, think more like, how can I help? How can I solve your problems? How can I bring my expertise? I mean, I studied all this, right, to help whoever I'm hiring to help. So I think sometimes we get too focused on like what we've studied or what we've done or what we've accomplished versus why I did what I did to do what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Because you want the potential client to read and say, oh my gosh, I connect with her. I connect with this therapist. There's just something that's drawing me in, whether it's emotionally, whether it's like them understanding me cognitively. There's something here where this person is highlighted in my mind. I really want to make sure I reach out to this particular therapist. And you really want your profile to elicit that response, right? You want that inquiry to call and be like, oh my gosh, I saw your profile. I saw your website. You are like speaking to me. I need to work with you. Like that's what you need the copy to really reflect,
Yeah, kind of like essentially, since they haven't met you yet, like how did they perceive that copy? Is it warm? Is it educational? Like sometimes I almost feel like every time I write copy for a client in general, I think of their personality. And obviously I have a conversation with the client when we're doing custom work, but like typically I'll think like, is this one example is like I have one doctor that I'm working with and she's more reserved, but she's still very like warm. But I wouldn't say she's overly bubbly. So when I would write her copy, it's not going to be overly bubbly. It might be more like a tone of like wanting to thoroughly understand you and like caring about you and the approach of listening to your needs versus maybe some clients I work with that are more bubbly and the message might sound more exciting and more like, and that's important because you might have a more bubbly person read your page and be like, oh, I connect with this. This is the kind of person I want to work with. Or you might have someone that's a little more reserved and that bubbly tone might just not be for them. And automatically reading the website might help them get a sense of who you are and then decide like, man, I kind of like how this is written, and it's just subconscious. They don't always realize it, but that is so important. Like, how are they going to connect through that messaging that you're putting on your page?
Yes, 100%. And I think that sometimes therapists wrongly think the copy needs to be drawing in all of those different people when really the goal though is to also be working with your ideal clients, right? Like if I'm bubbly, I want my website to reflect that. I don't want to draw in people who don't like that because I want the connection to be genuine and organic and authentic. And so naturally we want to present our authentic self, right? And so it's okay if that also, restricts some people. We don't want everyone to connect with us, right? We don't want to be a therapist for everyone. We don't want even our personalities to connect with everyone. That's okay, right? And I think part of this process is also really just owning that and seeing the value in that.
Yeah, I think I ran a comment one day just to kind of spin off of that in the group one day where there was a therapist that mentioned how they felt like one of the clients they were working with, they weren't kind of connecting. It was kind of like an anonymous post, and it just kind of got me thinking. Maybe I didn't think about it at the time, but maybe how was the messaging? What, were you trying to connect with everyone, or were you genuine on your site where maybe that person wouldn't have originally reached out, or maybe they just reached out because you offered a service that maybe they needed, but they didn't get an overall feel for who you were. And so instead of taking it personally and being like, oh, maybe they didn't like me, I don't think that's what it is because, every personality is different. And I think we go through that as business owners, just period, regardless. Because I could say as a designer, my feelings, I would lie if I said I never got my feelings hurt that someone didn't pick me and they picked somebody else. But I also realized like maybe they picked someone else because that style matched what they wanted better than the style I provided. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that I'm a terrible designer. It just means that that person wasn't my tribe, so to speak.
Absolutely. And seeing the value of working with your tribe, right? Like it feels good for everyone involved when we're with our people, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go into SEO some. I know we talked about you have multiple referral sites, which is a part of SEO, which is perfect. Let's kind of talk about, did you do any work on setting up your SEO? Did you hire anyone to do your SEO? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I did hire to have my website done for me. So it's a WordPress website. I hired a company that this department specifically works with therapists. And part of that was them continuing to increase my SEO month by month by month, right? And so SEO was a piece that was being done for me that I myself didn't kind of take part in, but I knew that they were assisting me with that. It was kind of one of those pieces where I was like, you know what? I would rather invest money. We have to kind of understand for ourselves, right? Like what areas do I want to learn how to do the thing in and save the money? And what areas am I like, nope, you can have it. So that was one area for me where I'm like, nope, I'm going to invest out and have someone do that for me. The also being in multiple places. So if you Google me and my therapy, right, I'll come up on obviously Google Business. My Instagram will come up. Psychology Today will come up. I'm on IOCDF page, which is International OCD Foundation listings, right? So you immediately see, oh, okay, this is right, a therapist that I can trust. I see that she's in multiple places. There's multiple places in which I can read about her. There's multiple places in which people could find me. And I feel like that's been really helpful.
I love that. And it's so funny. I was editing one of the other podcasts and we were talking about mentorship in that one, something a little different, but we were talking about investing, right? And sometimes there's always a fear of like where to invest, or sometimes people don't want to invest. And if you're not investing, I always tell people, if you have the time on your hands to do it, then do it. And if you don't have the time, then sometimes it makes more sense if you're making the money to invest in hiring someone so you can keep doing what you do well, which is making more money, working in what you do. Because I always tell people I'm very mathematical, especially I think that's one thing I probably learned. My dad was a business owner, so it was like that I'm just very mathematical. So I'm like, okay, does it make more sense to hire someone for X amount of dollars? And this is what I get paid an hour. Yeah, I still make X amount of dollar difference hiring someone for the same amount of time, which then maximizes my time. So now instead of only getting 40 hours a week, I might get 80 hours a week because I can hire somebody else. And now I'm still profiting X amount. And so I think more people need to learn to think like that, especially when you begin to run a business, because everyone just thinks like, oh my God, I'm losing money. There is a great book I read, and I'm going to throw it out there. It's called The Business Secrets of the Bible. Now, the author himself is like, you don't have to be, a Christian or whatever to read this book. There's still great principles. It's written by a Jewish rabbi. And it was really interesting because they talk about like the principles of finances. And one thing that they said that always stuck in my mind was how delegating certain tasks, not only are you blessing others because you're making money, now you're blessing others through giving them job opportunities, but it also made me realize that when you're focusing more on what you do well, you make more money and you're able to delegate more, because now you're not trying to do everything. And when you're trying to do everything, you begin to burn out, you get exhausted, you feel overwhelmed, and then you can't do what you do well because you're tired, or because you're kind of burning, what do they call it? Burning the candle at both ends. And so that was something I learned later on myself. Like in the very beginning, I was 21 when I started my business. I didn't have money. So I learned to do everything because I kind of had the time. And so I did it. But eventually I learned like, okay, I was starting to make more money. I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I need to find someone to help me. And that's when I started doing the math. Okay, if I'm making X amount, how much am I paying them? Okay, I'm still making a profit. Let's hire them. And I think you have to start changing that mindset. It's not that you're losing money, you're paying to make more money.
Exactly. 100%. There's also another good book that was recommended to me by my old business coach, Who Not How. And it's the same principle, right? It's like the benefits of really thinking of, no, who can I hire to do that? Who can I hire to figure that out rather than how, right? How can I figure out how to do that on my own? And if we're, especially when that scarcity mindset kicks in and it's all, no, how, it can be so limiting because of we burn out, we're burning the candle both ends, and we become overwhelmed, and we can be more likely to say, hey, this isn't working for me, rather than seeing investing in the who can keep our energy up. It can keep our schedules aligned, right? And we can be putting our energy into the area in which we really need to be putting our energy, like our clinical work, right? I think the other thing that I really recognized when I invested in business coaching from a therapist who was a step ahead of me back a couple of years ago was you don't know what you don't know, right? So we're all going into this. Well, and I mean, obviously we're coming from different backgrounds, etc. But most of us are coming into this kind of figuring it out as we go, right? And so much of what I learned is like, I wouldn't even have thought of it that way, or I wouldn't even have known that if I didn't have my own business coach or I hadn't invested in learning more, right? And so we can easily get stuck in just our brain works a certain way. Naturally, we think about things a certain way. And we're not going to be able to see it through a different perspective or lens, whether it's money mindset or niching down or burnout, if we don't have other people giving us a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really good. And that kind of, like I said, ties into the other podcast I'm going to release on mentorship. And she's been in private pay practice for 20 years. And one thing I mentioned there too is like hiring someone that aligns with what you're trying to do. And I'm going to leave it there because I go more into it on that episode. But essentially, when you hire a mentor, someone that's, like you said, one step ahead of you to show you how to get there and fill in the gaps faster. It took me years and years. I mean, I've been running my branding agency 15 years. And for many years, I kind of just figured it out for many years. And I didn't hire anybody and no one was there to help me. And I learned a lot the hard way. I could have probably been further ahead if you think about it, had I, back then coaches weren't a big thing. I mean, back or in the early, I don't even know I can't even say mid 2000s because that's a lie. But like 2009, 10, all around there. I do want to kind of circle back to the SEO. I know we talked about you hiring somebody. Obviously, one thing I definitely want to point out is you being in telemedicine and how important your online presence is, because you're obviously, it's not like you're out there meeting people in person. And so the fact that you knew early on, like, I need to invest in this, I need to grow because I have my telehealth practice. I was kind of curious though, since you're in multiple states, do you have Google My Businesses in each state?
I do not. And, I just haven't needed to, right? I've just been consistent. So some of these things I just haven't put more energy into yet, just because it hasn't been a necessity. So as I continue on this path, right, some of these things, I may end up, looking into in terms of more marketing strategies. I do. In terms of the multiple states, a lot of it ends up being word of mouth. On my Psychology Today profile, I do put in the multiple zip codes. I put in multiple zip codes up to what it allows. So you have your 2 addresses, but then I think it allows you now to put in like maybe 4 other kind of cities or locations. So I'll add in Pennsylvania, New Jersey zip codes. So that's the way I get, people in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I am not doing any marketing in California and Florida. The way people find me is in those states is truly word of mouth.
Are you pretty active on social media, Instagram?
I have had clients come to me through Instagram. I also have an OCD online course. And so that is there through Instagram where people can access the information on that. I think the other thing that I find valuable about Instagram, though, even though I don't rely on it for direct inquiries, is once again just having another place where my name and information come up as a therapist. If someone, once again, Googles me and they can go check out my Instagram and they're like, oh, yeah, look at what she has posted about OCD and anxiety, it really can help firm up that connection and that sense of like, oh, yeah, this is her thing. Right. It's another place to kind of showcase, right, your style, your personality, your expertise, just like your website does.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Instagram sometimes can rank higher than your own website. And people don't always know that if you do your SEO in your bio and stuff correctly. I always like to say social media is a great nurturing tool. Especially when people aren't sure yet. So if you're just staying active, sometimes you may feel like no one's paying attention, but I feel like it's the ones that never comment that actually are the ones that are like paying attention or like liking your stuff. They're the ones that are kind of watching. I do want to kind of like ask, when you were being consistent, were you like making reels? Were you making educational videos? What's the kind of content you were putting out there on your Instagram?
Yeah, that is something that is actually one of my goals, is to do more reels, to have my face on there more. A lot of my posts are just carousels, are just kind of static posts that are focused on OCD, that are focused on self-compassion, OCD education, psychoeducation, reminders, for people suffering with OCD. So it's kind of more of this like supportive place. I do think if you go on there, you do get a little bit of a sense of who I am, and it does kind of allow for some of that introduction as my website does. But I do think that's a really important area in terms of that vulnerability and that willingness to show your authentic self as a clinician, right? And I do get inquiries from people who specifically say about my website, your just about section, like who you are as a person. I appreciate what you shared about yourself there, right? The fact that I say I'm a highly sensitive person, that I'm someone who has had anxiety since I was a young kid, right? That I consider myself, highly sensitive, very empathic. I'm an INFJ. And so I do have people who's like, oh, yes, thank you so much. I feel like I can already kind of connect with you. And the Instagram, I think, allows for that a little bit as well, right? Now, you could definitely take that to a higher level, though. I definitely could take that to a higher level in terms of really showcasing my personality and myself more. But that's an area I think that, I definitely have struggled with in terms of kind of overcoming that fear of being vulnerable, and also knowing that I am the therapist. And so kind of that, how much do I really want to share, given that this is really about the client, not about myself. But I do really recognize the importance of that vulnerability as well.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like you're showing them, hey, I'm human too. And so I think sometimes it's like when someone is trying to lose weight and that person has always been fit their whole life, it's like the person that has never been fit be like, thinks to themselves, how can you really help me if you've never been in my shoes? Right. So it's like you're saying, I've been there, I get it. And so people feel that connection. I think that might be something worth considering on your about section on your website if you're kind of trying to either rewrite your content or write your content. Another thing that interested me is you said you have a course. So tell me a little bit about what is the course about? And I know this might be something many therapists sometimes worry about. It's like, okay, how can you sell something without getting in trouble because it's multi-states and all that? I personally have bought a course from a woman in Georgia, on a psychotherapist on toxic relationships. So I'll throw that out there. And so I know she positions it as master classes. So I'm kind of curious, how do you position your course to be able to maybe someone else that might be thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because my course doesn't offer any direct contact, right? They really are purchasing a course that they are going to do autonomously, from their own living room without contact for me. It's clear that obviously, right, with disclaimers of I am not your therapist. They are not able to kind of reach back out to me and me offer any therapeutic guidance with regard to the course. That's what their therapist would be there for. It really is meant more as kind of this psychoeducational tool. I really thought of it as if someone goes onto Amazon and buys an OCD workbook, that is geared toward obviously clients, patients, not towards clinicians. What do those workbooks does, right? Like, what do they entail? Like, it's typically psychoeducation and then some guidance, some information with regard to kind of a treatment modality and how you apply it. And that's exactly what the online course is, right? So it's kind of a workbook put in a digital form where there's 3 components, right? It's going through psychoeducation. It's going through what exposure and response prevention is, which is one of the main treatments for OCD. Them understanding a little bit of how you would apply exposure and response prevention, the importance of acceptance, the importance of core values, and the importance of self-compassion. And so they could take that information just like they would a book or a workbook, but then have to work with their own therapist to really apply it, unless they're in a position where they can really kind of take that on themselves.
Yeah, no, that actually totally makes sense. I remember before I went into therapy, at times I would watch like YouTube videos, and it was like exactly kind of what you're mentioning now. Like it would be educational. And so it'd kind of be like, oh, that makes sense. Or like, oh, now I understand. It's kind of like the light bulb moment. But then you go to the therapist to help you actually work through your own personal things you need to work through. Would a majority of your clients, do they not have insurance? Or would you say a majority do have insurance and they still choose to pay the cash price?
The majority of my clients have insurance. Actually, I don't know of any client who doesn't have insurance. It is pretty split in terms of clients who either don't have good out-of-network benefits or they just don't care. And so there's just no in contact with insurance at all on their part. Other clients do request a super bill, and they do utilize their out-of-network benefits, which I don't take part in, right? They submit the super bill. Their out-of-network bill or benefits can be billed, and then they'll still pay me privately the full rate. And then if they have out-of-network benefits, they receive that reimbursement.
Yeah, no, that's really good to know. Do you feel like offering the super bill option motivates people to feel more comfortable using you?
My experience has been, once again, it's about 50-50. I have probably about 50% of my inquiries are not concerned at all. They'll just, it's just straight private pay. They're not worried about insurance, period. I'd say probably about 50% of my inquiries, their out-of-network benefits, it does take part in their decision. Like that's part of their decision. And okay, eventually I'm going to get 50% reimbursement from this. I can make this work. So it really depends. I'd say it's pretty split.
I still think that's a good to know, because if you're starting your practice and you don't even, maybe some people have heard of super bills, maybe some people haven't wanted to even consider that, maybe just knowing that you don't have to deal with any of the billing, but like maybe just providing them the super bill and they deal with the rest could maybe motivate more people to want to use their practice, because at least they know they're getting some kind of reimbursement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously it depends on the client. Some inquiries, they aren't even kind of aware of out-of-network benefits. They've never looked into it. Other possible clients have already, used their healthcare, their out-of-network benefits and healthcare before. So they're already kind of used to the rigmarole. They already know, like, yep, I know my out-of-network benefits is 50%. I know I have a 2,000 deductible. After 4 months of us meeting, whatever it is, right? I know I'm going to start getting that, $125 back, the 50% from each session. And so they already have that in their mind. So yeah, it's really dependent on the client. But I do think there's, like I said, my experience is about 50%. It is helpful to offer that.
Oh, that's good to know. What was your biggest challenge when you were starting, and what advice or what information would you share with someone that's starting or that is struggling to grow their practice?
I think 90% of my obstacles or my kind of journey to get to where I've been at these last few years was mindset. I don't think it was logistical or practical or tangible things. It really was me going into private practice with a probably pretty typical therapist mindset versus a business mindset of, being used to being undervalued and underpaid, and just seeing things from this lens of anxiety and wanting to take over responsibility for clients and people pleasing. And by over responsibility for clients, what I'm saying is like in terms of fee, right? Like, oh, no. Okay, so I'll just reduce my fee, right? Like I'll just take less and kind of take responsibility for the client to kind of avoid having those difficult conversations. And I honestly believe the vast, vast majority of success in having an ongoing, thriving private practice is mindset. It really is perspective. It's really working through, money mindset, niching down, seeing the power of niching down and not, once again, falling into that scarcity of, but if this client calls, or no, I'm not going to be working with this client. And it's so much of that is anxiety driven. Reducing burnout, not changing our schedules just because the client needs their time changed, right? There's all these ways in which we put ourselves in these positions where we're constantly being flexible for the client out of our own fears and anxiety, whether it's money, whether it's, the client being upset with us. And as soon as I did that deeper work, which I was fortunate enough to do while I was doing private practice part-time. So by the time I went in full-time 3 years ago, I was good there. Like my mindset had completely shifted by then. So I was off and running, but I see how it took me those kind of a couple years of this journey of really being able to work through my own stuff. My advice would be do the work, right? Do the deeper work, get support, surround yourself with other like-minded clinicians who are private pay. Yeah, do the deeper work, surround yourself with other clinicians who are private pay, surround yourself with, get a business coach, get a mentor, join groups, like really do the deeper work of what is coming up for you when you are trying to set these boundaries, when you're trying to establish that higher rate. All of that work, right? You need support around. Get that support.
You said it quite perfectly. Like sometimes I've struggled with this too when I was younger, when I was first starting to like, we want to cut our fees to get the project or to get the client, right? And in the end, we end up messing with our own mental health because we're frustrated, or we don't feel valued, or we feel like we're being used because we're doing all this work and we don't feel like we're being paid what we deserve. And so I think that's really good advice to give to people. That I think it is really a mindset thing that we all have to work through over time. And it is uncomfortable. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you picked up some great nuggets in this episode. If you don't already follow us, you can follow us at The Clinician Atelier. You can also visit our website to listen to other podcasts. And I hope you tune in the future for other great content that we will continue releasing on just marketing and running your practice